Are employers ready for a shift beyond the Holidays Act? This week, we're joined by Anamika Sharma, employment lawyer and workplace relations specialist, currently supporting the Woolworths Group, to unpack New Zealand's proposed shift away from the Holidays Act and what the new employment leave framework could mean in practice. While the proposed model is designed to simplify leave entitlements, and we all know that that's very much needed, and to reduce administration burden on businesses, the transition may not be as straightforward as it first appears. From payroll systems and policy updates to compliance risks and employee expectations, there are important considerations for organisations that want to stay ahead of the change. Also on today's show, application overload. How do you stand out without overstretching the truth? And lastly, are you looking to hire quality talent fast? We have another 3 new top candidates that are ready for work across New Zealand. No mai, haere mai, and a very warm welcome to Mahi Matters, New Zealand's employment market update. Very pleased to see you again here today. So, as you heard, New Zealand is proposing a major reset of its leave system, with a new employment leave bill set to replace the Holidays Act 2003. The proposed changes would shift leave to a simpler hours-based model, with leave accruing from day one and being tracked and paid in hours rather than through the more complex, very complex calculations used under the current law. The bill also introduces new categories of working time and updated rules around how different types of leave and public holidays would apply, particularly for employees with less regular work patterns. For employers, this sets the scene for significant change in how leave entitlements could be understood and managed if the new framework moves ahead. Now, to discuss this further, we're joined today by Anamika Sharma, employment lawyer and workplace relations specialist, currently supporting the Woolworths Group. Welcome, Anamika. Thanks so much for coming on board today.
Kia ora, Shannon. Great to be here.
Now, start off, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you're currently doing.
Yes, so I am a New Zealand and Australian employment lawyer, and I am typically brought into large organisations with sort of complex workforces. And my role is really to take sort of employment law compliance, operational reality, and make it work depending on sort of business needs. So, yes, like you mentioned, I'm currently supporting the Woolworths Group. We have a very large footprint, both across New Zealand and Australia. We employ thousands of team members across sort of supermarkets, retail, distribution centres, and our support offices. So because our workforce is so incredibly diverse, any shift in leave legislation will have very, very large impacts. And we range from sort of full-time salary, part-time, variable, casual, you name it. So we deal with almost every working arrangement that you can imagine. So we do see the practical challenges of leave legislation right up close.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of complex organisation really is going to be the litmus test. And, you know, the idea is that it's simplifying and as we said, on the face of things, it looks like it's going to be a big improvement, but really that's going to be the test if it works for all those different scenarios. So just to give us a bit of background, I guess if you could summarise the proposed shift away from the Holidays Act and what we're actually trying to achieve, all the things.
Yeah, great question. So it's essentially about moving from weeks and days, a weeks and days system, to an hours-based framework. So the current system, as you identified, is well known to be complex, too complex in fact, and it leads to sort of widespread but inadvertent non-compliance. And so the new piece of legislation that's been proposed is intended to be simple, clear, and just provide that certainty to workers and employers about entitlements and obligations. I think for so many years now, employers have really struggled to understand and apply the Holidays Act correctly. And what that leads to is workers not getting their correct entitlements. So, administrative burden, compliant costs are huge for employers. And like I said, despite good intentions, non-compliance is widespread and it's an ongoing issue across both public and private sectors. The financial toll has been massive, so most businesses have been part of some type of remediation program in the last sort of couple of decades, collectively costing billions of dollars. I know one public sector employer in New Zealand that has had to pay over $300 million in Holidays Act remediation payments, so it's massive. So hopefully this proposed shift from weeks and days to hours hopes to fix this enormous administrative burden and ensure the system actually works for modern businesses.
And why do you think that the current Holidays Act has become such a difficult framework for employers to manage and practice? We talked about some of the big mistakes that have happened and very public mistakes. What's been the big difficulty?
Yeah, again, I think the core issue is the weeks and days. I mean, weeks and days doesn't necessarily map to a modern, flexible workforce. So, under the current system, a worker's annual leave balance, as you know, is held in weeks. And so that automatically scales to match their working week when they reduce or increase their hours. So, as an example, if a worker increases their weekly hours of work, they effectively receive an increase in their leave balance. And if they reduce, then they effectively receive a reduction in their balance. So, for employers, trying to manage that, communicate that constant shift is a really big headache. Then on top of that, you have payment calculations. So currently there are different calculations for different leave types. And more complex calculations to reflect those variable components of pay like overtime, commissions, bonuses, allowances. So that's an added complexity. And then when it comes to actually taking the leave, then it's taken in a portion of weeks. So employers and workers have to agree on the portion of a week being taken based on what genuinely constitutes a working week. And that's at the time that the leave is taken. And
Sure.
then on top of that, I thought I was
wait,
finished.
there's more.
On top of that, let's not forget the otherwise working day test for public holidays. So under the current system, when it's not clear if a day is an otherwise working day, employers and workers, they have to consider a range of factors to agree on whether or not the worker would have otherwise worked on that day. So when you've got so many different types of tests and calculations for workers whose shifts vary week to week, you can see why errors happen so easily.
Yeah, and of course we've got Anzac Day, or the Mondayized version of Anzac Day coming up. So it's that question of, is Monday a regular day of their work week, or how many Mondays does it take to make it a regular work week? So I think there's definitely some things that can improve, and if we can make it simpler, that's going to be better. But I guess on the flip side, from an employer's perspective, what are some of the biggest misunderstandings about the proposed changes right now, or that are coming through?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest sort of misunderstanding right now revolves around the timeline and sort of the assumption that the old rules are instantly gone. Absolutely not the case. So until the Holidays Act is formally repealed and the new act comes into force, all the existing rules will still apply. So what that means is that employers will still need to comply with the current Holidays Act and ensure that they're providing the correct entitlements and payments to workers. It's proposed that there's a 24-month implementation period. So that's between when the bill passes and when it comes into force. That's 2 years. So what this is designed to do is provide time for payroll providers and employers to make changes to their businesses and payroll systems. Another sort of major misconception is that the new legislation will wipe the slate clean on sort of those past remediation mistakes. It definitely does not. Employers will still have an obligation to correct some of those historical underpayments, but what the new legislation does is it provides for a statutory remediation process, which means it basically provides sort of an estimation type tool, which will be another option, a new option for employers to address historical underpayments.
Okay. Now, this wasn't on your list of questions or the framework here, but how far away do you think these changes are, or for when it would come into come into legislation and come into play?
Yes, so just yesterday there were submissions made to the Select Committee. So, what that means is groups of businesses and organisations, unions, committees are invited to the Select Committee to give their feedback on sort of the first draft of the bill. So, that just happened yesterday. The Select Committee will go away, consider that, they'll come back with a redraft, it will have its second reading, and then it will go through the usual parliamentary process. So, it's anticipated that it will come into force later this year.
Excellent. All right. And where do you see the biggest risks and opportunities for employers as these proposed reforms start to take shape?
Yeah, I think in terms of opportunities, the biggest win for employers is probably simplicity and flexibility. So, under the new system, you'll have the same hourly leave pay rate, which will be used for all types of leaves. So, ideally, that will make things very simple. We're also seeing much greater flexibility in the way that you can take leave. For example, sick leave, a worker can use their accrued sick leave in hours to take any part of a day off work. So for every hour that a worker takes off, they will use 1 hour of accrued sick leave. So that's really good in terms of flexibility. Then there's also a good opportunity for both parties regarding cash ups. So in each 12-month period, you can agree to a cash up maximum of 25%, which is similar to the current legislation. You can cash up the 25% of your annual leave. And so employers who agree to cashing up will benefit from reduced leave liability, which we know is a huge problem across lots of large organisations. And then finally, I think another opportunity for workers is the parents. So parents returning from leave will receive their full holiday pay rate instead of what it historically was being calculated on average earnings, which reduced their leave rate quite significantly. So those are some great opportunities. In terms of risks, annual leave will now be based on your basic pay or your basic salary, lowest rate only. So commission and bonus will be excluded, and what that will lead to will be a decrease in pay for some employees. Then there's sort of those immediate cash costs to employers, the 12.5% leave compensation payment that has to be paid upfront on all additional hours and casual hours. So that will be costly for businesses up front. Another thing to sort of consider are the transitional provisions, which will require that conversion. So businesses will have to undertake a very big exercise of converting all existing leave balances held in weeks and days over into hours. So getting that mathematical conversion perfect across the entire workforce is going to require a lot of work.
Just those things. Sounds like it might be time to treat your payroll teams and HR teams to a bit of downtime and refreshing, because they're going to have a lot of work on the plates coming up. And well, it kind of pays to be kind to the people who pay you, doesn't it? Thank you so much for coming on. Even though I should know a lot about this, I definitely learnt a few things there and went, oh, that makes a bit more sense on my payslip now. But hopefully it'll get a lot simpler for everyone going forward. Thanks for joining us. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of work to keep you busy over the next stage.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Okay, so let's go on to Mahi Media. Application overload. How do you stand out without overstretching the truth? While we've just been talking about changes in employment law and how workplaces are evolving, it's worth looking at what's happening on the other side of the market, the job search itself. One of the latest buzzwords during the rounds in recruitment is career fishing, where candidates feel pressure to exaggerate or stretch their experience just to stand out in a competitive market. And while it's easy to roll our eyes at another trend and buzzword, it actually points to one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now: application overload. Despite improvements in job vacancies, we're still seeing high volumes of candidates applying for roles, so typically still hundreds per job. And when you're up against that level of competition, it's no surprise some people feel pressure to stretch the truth just to get noticed. But here's the reality: finding a job is not the same as winning a raffle. Your odds don't increase the more applications you put through. In fact, high volumes of poorly matched applications can have the opposite effect. They can increase reliance on AI tools to filter candidates, which makes it harder for genuinely suitable people to stand out. So rather than applying for everything or feeling pressure to oversell, the smarter approach is to be selective and intentional. Ask yourself, do I meet most of the core criteria? What's my genuine point of difference for this role? And can I clearly connect my experience to what this company actually needs? Because the candidates who are getting through aren't the ones who are applying to the most roles. They're the ones making it easy for employers to picture them in the role. At the same time, there's a responsibility on employers too. If candidates are applying in high volumes and not hearing back, it fuels frustration, and behaviours like exaggeration or disengagement become more likely. That's why communication matters. So, at Frog, for example, we've adapted how we manage high volume roles, which is pretty much every role at the moment still. So, when applications are high, we send automated updates to let candidates know that there may be a delay, and importantly, that they're still being considered. They haven't just gone into a black hole. We also notify candidates once their application has been reviewed so they're not left wondering. And while, of course, we do use AI to support the process, every application is still reviewed by a human consultant, and decisions are made by people, not algorithms. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a process problem, it's a trust problem. If candidates feel seen, they don't need to exaggerate. And if employers communicate clearly, they can get better engagement. And somewhere in the middle, we get back to what hiring should be about: finding the right fit, not just the loudest application. Well, that is it for this week. Thanks again for joining us. As always, we'd love to hear from you, whether you want to share your thoughts on the upcoming employment leave bill, or if you've got a great career fishing story, or maybe a confession. We'd love you to get in touch. See you next time.